in Islam is well known. When I read this article, I could not believe about the existence of it, and I am very grateful to Dr. Craig Considine for reporting on this. The extremist group based in Irving refers to itself as the Bureau of American Islamic Relations, BARE, an obvious mockery of the Council of American Islamic Relations, CARE, which carries out crucial work to safeguard the constitutional rights of Muslims in the United States. With us today to talk about BARE is Professor Craig Considine. Dr. Craig Considine is currently a faculty member of the Department of Sociology at Rice University in Houston, Texas. He is a Catholic American of Irish and Italian descent. He was born and bred in Boston and has studied in Washington, D.C., London, and Dublin. He is passionate about peacemaking. As a sociologist, Craig focuses on many topics, including religious pluralism, Islam, Muslims in America, Christian-Muslim relations, interfaith studies, race and ethnic relations, American identity, Irish identity, comparative research, and ethnography. He is currently turning his doctoral dissertation into a book manuscript called Pakphobia, Islam, Race, and Pluralism in Pakistani Diaspora, to be published by Routledge, Taylor, and Francis Group. His latest peer-reviewed article is titled Religious Pluralism and Civic Rights in a Muslim Nation, an analysis of Prophet Muhammad's covenants with Christians. I normally don't read such a long bio, but I thought your bio was so interesting. Welcome to Middle East in Focus, Professor Craig Considine.
Thank you, Negla, so much. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, so as I said very passionately, I could not believe it when I read this article that this organization exists and there isn't much conversation within the media about it. Tell us about, again, I said a little bit about it in the beginning, but tell us who and what the Bureau of Islamic American Relations is and as much detail as you can as far as you know about them.
Sure. Well, the first time I heard about BARE was through this Al Jazeera video. Some Al Jazeera reporter actually got in touch with some of these American citizens here in Texas. They're largely based in the Dallas, Irving area. And so this reporter went and visited them, and, I was as shocked as you were, not so much by what they were doing with the pig's blood, but the fact that Americans, politicians, religious leaders are not actually calling for an investigation or some type of research into this group. Now, they are relatively small. It's kind of an obscure group. As I mentioned, I follow these hate groups, and I had never heard about them. They're probably about a few dozen members. But the issue here is that it only takes a few people to cause a lot of harm and damage into society. So the fact that they're a small group, I think, is irrelevant because really they are a hate group. And by dipping pig's blood in bullets and basically saying we're ready to kill Muslims, I mean, that is very, very alarming. And it doesn't seem to be really gathering the attention of non-Muslims. Now, I know the Muslim community around Dallas and around Irving is very, very suspicious. I think that's probably an understatement, but they're very worried about this group. This group is showing up at mosques carrying AR-15 rifles, which is the favorite rifle of all of these mass shooters that go around killing innocent Americans. So they're showing up at mosques. They're posting names of Muslims and non-Muslims, they call them non-Muslim sympathizers, onto their website and to their Facebook page. Now, we don't really know what the intention is there, but, you start seeing a group like this posting names and you start wondering if they're actually inciting people to violence. So I think the last overall kind of detail I'd like to provide for this group is they live in this kind of mythical world, this mythical trend in American society that Muslims are somehow Islamizing everything. So they're very worried about this mythical threat of Sharia law overtaking constitutional law. I mean, they're just kind of they're really out there, and I think they're potentially very dangerous, and they should be taken a lot more seriously by local authorities and also Washington, D.C.
This is Middle East in Focus. We are talking about the rise of Islamophobia and the organization BEAR, an extremist white group based in Irving, Texas, training against a non-existent Islamic uprising by dipping their bullets in pig's blood and bacon grease to target Muslims, with Professor Craig Considine of Rice University, who, again, excellently reported on this and asked the important question, why isn't anybody asking where the group BEAR was radicalized? We're also joined today with a guest host, Tariq Shauki. He will be with us in our second half as a guest because he has a lot of information to provide us about another topic that we'll talk about very shortly. But he is going to join us for this first half as a guest host, and I want to bring him into the conversation. Professor Considine, I wanted to ask you a follow-up question, which is, what is law enforcement doing about this group BEAR? I mean, have they taken any action whatsoever? Has there been anybody that has reported it to law enforcement? And this is something, again, I'll have Tariq chime in a minute to ask some follow-up questions because he's also a criminal defense attorney. So if you could comment on the role of law enforcement at this point with BEAR.
Well, to be honest, I don't know the specific details, but I'm very confident that there are good American citizens out there who are Muslim and non-Muslim who I'm sure have reported this new organization to local authorities. It's made international news. It's made The Guardian and The Washington Post. So people actually know about them. So I'm confident that, American citizens are doing their civic duty and reporting this group, because really I would consider it their beliefs and their activities is outside the boundary of, what this country in theory should stand for. Secondly, I would assume that, and again, this is an assumption, that local authorities and national authorities are probably looking into this group, again, because they're now so visible. But I think what kind of catches me off guard, and Negwa, you've kind of touched upon this, is like, where is the larger discussion? Why aren't intelligence agencies or whatever in Washington, D.C. actually coming out publicly and saying this group is problematic? We need to take this group seriously. So it's kind of hard to say, really. Your guest might have more detail in terms of what local law enforcement is doing, but just from the position that I'm in, I just don't think enough is being done to squash this group, because they're hateful and they're inciting violence.
And what kind of, can you, again, you touched upon it in your article, but can you elaborate on the kind of discriminatory double standard BEAR exposes regarding the representation and conversation around national security within the media and within the government?
Right. So this is a topic that is kind of close to my heart and to my mind, and it's all stemming from what I like to describe as the 9/11 narrative. So 9/11 happens for the first time, really, in modern history. Muslims in America become very prominent. They're in the spotlight. And as they rise into national prominence, you have this word terrorism, right? So this word terrorism I have written about extensively. I argue that it's really a propaganda term, and it's used by our national government to create an image of an enemy that we must squash, not only domestically but also around the world. So you create the boogeyman, and in this situation, in this case, we have the Muslim boogeyman, which justifies, if you create the threat and people believe the threat through the propaganda term, there's almost a justification for the government to do what it wants to do. So there is clearly a double standard. This term terrorism, this term even radical, is solely for the purpose of deploying only in discussions of Islam and Muslims. Once in a while you'll see this term pop up in non-Muslim situations. I know with Dylan Roof, the white Christian individual who went into the predominantly black church in Charleston, South Carolina, and killed 9 people, immediately it was not reported as terrorism, right? Because he's not part of the boogeyman group. He's not Muslim. He's not brown. He's not colored. So slowly, reports came out, and people started asking, why isn't he a terrorist? And people were defining him as terrorist. But I think generally speaking, there's a consensus that terrorism only happens when Muslims are involved. And obviously we're just using terms. These terms don't mean anything. They only have meaning because the government has given it meaning. And the second point I want to make in terms of the double standard, and I think this is probably one of the bigger points that I'll talk about today, is we see the Islamization of radicalism, right? So we have this idea that radicals are only Muslims and they're only followers of Islam, right? So when we talk about radical Christianity, there's certainly a lot of that in this country, much more so than radical Islam, however you want to define it. So we have that development as well, the Islamization of religious radicalism. There are certainly non-Muslims who are radical, but in terms of the media depiction, we only see the words, radical Christian, or even this loaded term, jihad or jihadism. Obviously, totally misconstrued by the media, totally taken out of context. It has multiple meanings and everything. But Christians don't get, this special word designated to them when they act out. The individual, the Planned Parenthood shooter, Robert Deere, right? This man, the FBI did an investigation on him, and he had tons of social media activity saying, everyone needs to repent and turn to Jesus, and the rapture is coming, clearly invoking radical Christianity. But where is the discussion about radical Christianity in this country? Where are local law enforcement groups going into communities and wondering how these Christian people are getting radicalized? It might be happening, but who knows about this? I certainly don't know. I've heard nothing about it.
Professor Constantine, this is Tariq Shauki, Negwa's co-host today. And to build on that point, there's certainly a lot of Islamization of radicalization, as you correctly put it. And I think a lot of that is based in misinformation and what people think they know about Islam and Muslims. So can you speak to what BEAR is doing to perpetuate misinformation, or where they are misinformed about Islam, that allows them to make these otherwise false connections?
I was thinking about this question because it always pops up. And BEAR is so ignorant and misinformed about Islam that it's actually difficult for a scholar and researcher like me to pinpoint where to start explaining where they've gone wrong. But I think there are several points that we can look at. One, they're misinformed because they always suggest that Islam is a monolith, right? So when we have discussions about Islamophobia, this is usually the main point. People say something ridiculous like Islam is evil or Islam promotes violence, right? These terms are useless, really, because obviously Islam is not a monolith. You have multiple sects, you have different types of Muslim communities, you have culture influencing Islam, and so on and so forth. So they suggest that Islam is a monolith, and obviously that is very problematic. And if groups and individuals cannot understand that point, it's very difficult to start really getting through to them and trying to explain to them where they might have gone awry. So that's the first point. The second point is they think that Islam or Muslims are foreign, right? That they're infiltrating the society, that they're somehow practicing a separate system of beliefs. They live in isolation. So this idea of being separate, which is also false. If we look through American history, Islam and Muslims have always been a part of the American story. Even before this country was founded, there were Muslims on what we would today consider American soil, right? And you also have groups like CARE. You have Congressman Keith Ellison and Congressman Andre Carson in Washington, D.C., serving in the House of Representatives, clearly not separate, advocating for religious pluralism and civic rights, right? So we also have Muslim Americans serving in the military. Now, that's something I've written about. It's a controversial topic considering how the United States justified their invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and other countries. But this idea that somehow Muslims are other and Muslims are foreign is just simply not true. And then I think two or three more points in terms of where Bear has gone wrong is they suggest that Islam is somehow inferior, which is also it's absolute nonsense. If Islam was inferior, why does Islam, this is a question that I pose, if Islam is inferior, then why does Islam motivate people to do great acts of humanity and charity, not only in this country, but around the world? You have Muslim doctors, you have Muslim lawyers, you have Muslim engineers who are selfless people and who do a lot of great deeds for the community. And a lot of these people are motivated by Islamic principles. They're motivated and inspired by the example of Prophet Muhammad. So if Islam is inferior, then why do you have these amazing human beings and these amazing American citizens doing what they do? So that's another point. This idea that they're inferior is nonsense. And then Bear is also way off course in terms of how we should be thinking about Islam and Muslims, because they depict Muslims as the enemy. And I think this is a topic, especially today with the bomb blast in Baghdad. And Bear always looks to ISIS and these radical groups, but these groups are enemies of a lot of Muslims too. You know, like the overwhelming majority of Muslims in this country denounce what I think media would generally call Islamic extremism. And for Bear to come out and say, you know, Muslims are dangerous people and they want to kill people, it's absolute nonsense. There's no facts behind it. There are people who follow Islam that have died for this country. I mean, I have friends who have served in the military, and like I said, not to justify any of the invasions, but how could these people possibly be enemies of America if they are actually defending the country that Bear members claim to love so much?
This is Middle East in Focus, and we are talking about the rise of Islamophobia and the organization BEAR, an extremist white group based in Irving, Texas, training against a non-existent Islamic uprising by dipping their bullets in pig's blood and bacon grease to target Muslims. Our guest is Professor Craig Considine of Rice University, who reported on BEAR, asking the important question, why isn't anybody asking where the group BEAR was radicalized? Professor Considine, one of the other things that you have talked about extensively in your writings is their misconception of jihad, how BEAR has a very strong misconception of the word jihad. I think that's important, particularly in this time of Ramadan, the holy month of Ramadan, and what jihad actually really means within Islam and for practicing Muslims. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think the biggest thing in discussions about jihad, one, Negwa, as you pointed out, there's multiple ways of jihading, as I call it. There's multiple ways of jihading. But Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said that the biggest jihad, and again, jihad means to struggle. The biggest jihad is to struggle against your own soul, against your own desires, against your own weaknesses. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said that after returning from a engagement that the community was having with an enemy. So Prophet Muhammad basically said the biggest, most important jihad is how you go about fixing yourself and curing your own imperfections. So I think that's number one in terms of jihad. But jihad, you know, it's an open term. It means to struggle. And the Islamic tradition, according to, you know, the normative position, self-defense is completely justified. So, you know, when we say to jihad is to fight an enemy, you know, that is justified within the Islamic tradition. But what people in BEAR associate jihad with is this kind of like indiscriminate, like killing. You just go around and you just kill people, and that's not what I think most Muslims actually believe in. This idea, like the term jihadist, at least in the American lexicon and probably in the international lexicon, it's always associated with violence. You know, and that's a product of this 9/11 narrative that I was talking about, associating Islam and Muslims with terrorism. But it's just cruel for media and groups like BEAR to associate a holy term. I mean, to struggle is something that human beings do, not just Muslims. Like, we all struggle with things, and we all try to transcend things that are holding us down, and we're trying to get in touch with, our spirituality and our surroundings and our relations with other people. So for Bear to just say, okay, we have a bunch of jihadists here, I mean, who's a jihadist, I mean, yeah, okay, ISIS, in theory, you could say a group like that is justified in calling themselves that, but they're a minority around in this country and around the world. Anyone can jihad. I jihad when Nego, as you mentioned, I'm not Muslim, but I consider myself sometimes as a jihadist. Sure, I struggle with a lot of things in my life, balancing my work life and my social life, and various things. So I think ultimately we just need to remember that jihad does not mean violence. And in fact, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that purifying the soul and working on perfecting yourself is more important than any other form of struggle that human beings have.
Professor Considine, you said something that's very powerful that most people would be afraid to say, which is that I am a jihadist. And you say it in the true sense of what that means, which is I am someone striving to make myself a better person to all of humanity. Do you know what I mean? Which is really what the word means, and which you so beautifully reminded us always to remember the truth about the Islam, and again, I think the principles within Islam, because there's a lot of misconception and misperception propagated. And I think one of the things that's really beautiful about you, and again, you just said it as well, is that you're not Muslim, you're Christian. And I think that makes, what you say very powerful. And you wrote an article, in addition to the one we've been talking about in this segment, you wrote an article entitled, "Why This Christian Studies Islam." Building on what you've been talking about, can you talk about that article? What prompted you to write it? What message do you hope that readers walk away with? And why this awareness you're trying to raise about Bear is an extension of that?
Yeah, well, this is a very good question. And I think the best way for me to explain, because really this question is getting at, like, why do I do what I do? And I break it down on two levels. The first level is for the betterment of community. So I believe that the best way to build bridges between different religious groups and different cultural groups is through exposing yourself to other traditions or other customs and other sets of values that you may not be familiar with, because the only way I believe that we can really build bridges and build a stronger community is through personal experience. So, like, if you want to understand a certain religious group or a cultural group, you have to go talk to them. You have to go meet them. You have to see them in their environment. You have to eat with them. You have to spend time with them. You have to become friends with them. So I study Islam because I think it's important for us to become a tighter-knit community and a tighter-knit nation. We have to ask ourselves, who do we want to be as a country? Do we want to be a country that is divided up into small little communities where no one interacts with each other and misunderstanding and misperception and misinformation is rampant? Or do we want to become an open society where social interaction is encouraged, interfaith dialogue is encouraged, and intercultural exposure is something that happens? Now, I think the bridge building ultimately leads to more social harmony. It can lead to, I hope, peace. And that's such a cliche term that not enough people actually take seriously. Like, people are actually afraid to say the word, like, I'm a peacemaker, because they're like, oh, okay, this person's Gandhi, he's up in the clouds, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's an idealist. But for peace to actually exist, you actually have to start believing that peace is possible. And I'm a believer in that. So that's at the community level. And then individually, I'm a very spiritual person, and I'm always venturing outside of the Catholic tradition. I refer to myself as a Christian mystic. I always dabble in different religious traditions and philosophies and different sages from Rumi to Confucius to so on and so forth. And Islam just happened to really get my attention because it's always in the news, and we had the invasions of Iraq, which really bothered me. So for me, Islam, it enriches me and it enhances my knowledge base to understand the world and to understand the community that I live in and to understand politics and what's happening in this world. And by gaining all that exposure, I think it ultimately leads me to a connection with God, with a higher being, right? So God is all-knowing, all-seeing. And for us to just simply sit back and say, I have the truth, and I'm going to be content with living in isolation and not caring about what anyone else thinks, like, to me, that is not serving God's purpose, however you define God. So studying Islam and engaging with Muslims is spiritually enriching to me, and I feel like it's made me grow as a human being, and it's really made me think about the bigger picture, what is humanity? A question like that. Like, what is our purpose here? What does God expect of us? What are his intentions? So, yeah, I mean, I know that's kind of out there, but
no, I mean, it's sad that we would think it was out there. Do you know what I mean? And it's exactly the opposite. And I think that what's out there is organizations like Bear and Trump, quite honestly. And I do want to bring this back to the Trump candidacy and the significance of Bear under this environment where we see a rise of power of someone like Trump.
Yeah, and Trump is only empowering groups like this to act out. They think they're justified because Donald Trump is now popular and Donald Trump stands for whatever he stands in. Now everyone is able to act how they want to act. And to create a parallel, we see a very similar situation developing in the United Kingdom with the Brexit campaign. Britain is now no longer a member of Europe, or at least at the moment. And the amount of hate crime and racist attacks went up something like hundreds of percent. It was like 300%. So everyone is saying, not everyone, but a lot of people in Britain are saying, we won. We're leaving Europe. A lot of the campaign was driven by an anti-immigrant sentiment. So now that they won, they get to say, well, we won, so you lose, and we can do whatever we want. And I think a lot of this stuff is filtering out of Donald Trump's, pseudo-fascist rhetoric and campaign. I mean, he's literally ostracized numerous groups. So I don't know if you saw what he had posted to his Twitter account, which he recently deleted. It was an image of Hillary Clinton, and a Star of David was included right next to Hillary Clinton's face, and it said something inside the Star of David like the most corrupt politician ever, which anyone that understands stereotypes of the Jewish people suggests, Jews have all the money, therefore Jews rule the world, therefore Jews control Hillary Clinton. And he later deleted that, but that's blatantly anti-Semitic. And he's obviously blatantly Islamophobic. He's alienated Mexican Americans. He's alienated Black Americans. So, again, it goes back to my question, like, what kind of country do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a country that is divisive and where everyone lives in their little social bubbles and no one understands each other and no one talks to each other? Or do we want to use a bit of common sense and actually start interacting with one another and actually meeting with each other and holding public forums so people can represent themselves? I mean, to me, that's common sense. That creates a stronger country, not someone like Donald Trump who's just trying to put a sledgehammer down on anyone that is different from him or a group of people that holds different beliefs from him. I mean, it's just nonsense. It's not practical. It's not reasonable. Hate is not rational. It's not going to get us anywhere. I hope he is not successful in his campaign.
And Professor Considine, this is Tariq again. When I do see this rise of Islamophobia and Trump supporters and people that are, doing all this madness, I'm pleasantly surprised and reminded by the positivity that someone like you brings to the table, because I feel like the only remedy for Islamophobia, which is in fact rooted in ignorance, is for people who are intelligent to educate, to speak, and especially, like Negwa said, someone who is Christian, who's speaking in a place like Texas at an educational institute. I feel like the work that you're doing is so important, and you kind of are one of the hopes to counterbalance the Islamophobia that's spreading. And, you know, we really, as a Muslim here growing up and living in Southern California, when I say this stuff, I feel like I'm speaking to the choir. If I was in Texas, it would be a different story. So I really do value your voice there, and you being at an educational institution bringing up these very legitimate and important points that America needs to listen to and address before we go down on a road that history is going to show is not a good one. We wouldn't be on the right side of history if we go down this path.
I agree, and I think, you know, if I could kind of end on one note, it would be this. Like, I think I've been able to arrive at the state that I'm in at the moment because I actually just got rid of my own fears. You know, like after 9/11, I fell into the same trap that everyone else fell in. I was 15 years old. I was a high school student. No Muslims were in my town. Fell into the trap. I got to college. I wanted to study Islam, and I wanted to study it, I think, subconsciously because of fear. And then the more I studied it, the more I realized that there was nothing to be fearful of. But I really did not transcend all the brainwashing, all the propaganda, until I went out into communities and spent time with Muslims, right? So one of the issues that we face today in fighting Islamophobia are keyboard warriors and Google scholars, and even some academics who sit back and they read books and they listen to the news and they write about Islam and they write about Muslims and they publish works and they run blogs, and they have absolutely no exposure to human beings, to people. Actually, you know, going out into communities, going to iftar, spending Ramadan with Muslims, holding interfaith dialogue panels. That's where change happens. And that's why I keep reiterating this point of exposure. Like, we need to expose ourselves to each other. We need to be honest with each other. We need to talk about our differences. We don't have to agree on everything. That's impossible. We're human beings. But we need to meet in the common ground. You know, as Rumi says, one of my favorite poets, he says, you know, there's a field out there. Just meet me there. Meet me there, and we'll talk about it. We'll go for a walk. We'll work it out. You know, we'll break down these barriers. We'll become friends. And that's the key. I mean, I think that's where difference really happens, because there's nothing more powerful than experiencing something for yourself. Books are great. Books help with shaping the mind, but you have to complement that with real-world experiences.
This is Middle East in Focus, and we have been talking about the rise of Islamophobia and the organization BEAR, an extremist white group based in Irving, Texas, training against a non-existent Islamic uprising by dipping their bullets in pig's blood and bacon grease to target Muslims. Our guest has been Professor Craig Considine of Rice University, who reported on BEAR and asked the important question, why isn't anybody asking where the group BEAR was radicalized? Thank you so much, Professor Considine, for joining us today.